They were frozen and unconscious. Soldier carried both sisters miles through the storm. Corporal Jake Reeves pushed through the whiteout, each step a war against the screaming wind of Glacius 7. Ice mining claim, Inspector. That's what his fake ID said. What he really was, a deserter, a ghost, a man who came to the edge of charted space to disappear. Then he saw them, two small bodies half buried in the snowdrift. Children, alien. Their skin had that faint luminescent quality of the Crystari. Frost covered their faces like death masks, not breathing, or barely. Every instinct Jake had spent 3 years cultivating told him to walk away. This wasn't his problem. He'd sworn off saving people the day his entire squad died because he'd made the wrong call. The day command labeled him a coward and a deserter rather than admit their intelligence had been garbage. But his hands were already moving, checking for pulses. Faint. Too faint. Hypothermia. Stage 3, maybe 4. Minutes from gone. He could leave them. No one would know. No one even knew he was out here. One of the girls twitched. Her eyes cracked open. Crystal blue, unfocused, dying. She looked right through him, and in that moment, Jake saw his dead squad. Saw every life he'd failed to bring home. Damn it! He hauled the first girl onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry, then bent and scooped the second against his chest. 70, 80 pounds combined. His thermal scanner was dead, fried by the storm's electromagnetic interference. 5 miles to the nearest settlement, maybe 6 in these conditions. The wind chill would hit -60 before he made it halfway. His medic training kicked in through the rust. Keep them close. Share body heat. Move fast, but don't sweat. Sweat kills in cold like this. He wrapped his thermal cloak around all 3 of them and started walking, using the barely visible ridgeline as his only navigation point. The storm wasn't natural. Jake had worked Glacius 7 for 18 months. He knew its weather patterns. This was wrong, too focused, too sudden, like something engineered. But that was a problem for later. Right now, his world narrowed to the next step, then the next. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. Frostbite was already creeping into his fingers, where they gripped the girl's clothing. The smaller one, they had to be twins, identical down to the pattern of bioluminescent freckles on their cheeks, hadn't moved since he'd picked her up. The other stirred occasionally, small whimpers lost in the wind. "Stay with me," he muttered, though he didn't know if they could hear him, if they even spoke standard. "Stay with me, and I'll get you home." 3 miles in, his right knee gave out. Old injury from the war, badly healed. He went down hard, twisting to take the impact on his shoulder rather than crush the girl's. Pain detonated up his spine. For 10 seconds, he lay there in the snow, the storm howling its invitation to just stop, to rest, to let the cold take him. Then the girl against his chest coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Jake forced himself up, kept walking. The settlement's lights appeared like a hallucination through the white. Jake stumbled through the medical facility's door and collapsed, the girl spilling from his arms onto the heated floor. He tried to speak, to explain, but his jaw was locked with cold. The doctor, a Viridian with 6 arms, moved with practiced efficiency, scanners already humming over the girls' bodies. Severe hypothermia. Crystalline biology makes them more susceptible. Another 10 minutes. She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Jake's vision grayed at the edges. He felt hands on him, voices asking questions he couldn't answer. Someone was cutting away his gloves. He heard a sharp intake of breath. His fingers were white and waxy. 3rd-degree frostbite, probably. He'd lose some tissue, maybe a finger or 2. Didn't matter. The girls were breathing. He could see their chests rising and falling under the medical blankets, color slowly returning to their faces. He'd saved them. For the first time in 3 years, Jake Reeves had saved someone. Then consciousness left him, and he fell into darkness that felt almost peaceful. He woke to the sound of a ship landing, not the clunky transports that service the mining operations, but something sleek and fast. Diplomatic drives, his brain cataloged automatically. Military adjacent. He tried to sit up and discovered his hands were wrapped in regeneration sleeves, and his entire body felt like it had been run through a shredder. "Stay down, Corporal." the doctor's voice firm but not unkind. You walked 5.3 miles through a Class 5 thermal storm carrying 2 children. Your body needs time. The girls, stable, awake, asking for you, actually. They don't speak much standard yet, but they keep saying, warm man, and reaching toward this room. The doctor's expression softened. You're a hero, human, though I suspect you don't see it that way. The medical bay door opened. The woman who entered made the sterile room feel suddenly too small. She was Christari, tall and regal, her skin that same luminescent quality as the girls but more pronounced, like moonlight given form. She wore formal diplomatic robes, but they couldn't hide the coiled tension in her movements, the barely controlled terror in her crystal blue eyes as she looked past Jake toward the recovery room where her daughters lay. Then those eyes fixed on Jake, and he felt pinned, analyzed, understood in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. You are Corporal Jake Reeves. Not a question. Her voice carried the harmonics typical of high-caste Christari, like wind chimes in steel. Formerly of the Human Colonial Marines, 3rd Special Operations Group, declared a deserter 37 months ago after the Kepler 442 extraction failure. Jake's blood went cold for reasons that had nothing to do with frostbite. I am Ambassador Kyril of the Christari Diplomatic Corps, chief negotiator for the Human Christari Treaty Zone. She moved closer, and Jake caught her scent, something like ozone and night-blooming flowers. And the mother of Vera and Mira, the 2 daughters you carried through an artificial storm designed to kill them and bait me into an exposed position so I could be eliminated. The words hung in the air like a blade. The storm wasn't natural, Jake said slowly. No, it was a weapons-grade atmospheric manipulator, military technology, accessible only to someone with high-level clearance within the treaty compound. Kyril's composure cracked for just a moment, and Jake saw the raw fear beneath. Someone wants the treaty to fail badly enough to murder children. My children. She sat in the chair beside his bed, suddenly looking less like an untouchable diplomat and more like an exhausted mother who just had her worst nightmare nearly realized. I've read your file, Corporal Reeves, all of it, including the classified sections your command sealed. Her eyes met his, and there was no judgment there, only a desperate calculation. You didn't desert because you were a coward. You deserted because you refused to let your superiors bury the truth about who really failed that mission. You tried to save your squad, and when you couldn't, you tried to save their reputations. You were punished for having a conscience. Jake's throat tightened. No one had ever said it like that. No one had ever understood. I need someone with a conscience, Corporal. Someone who will protect my daughters not because they're tools in a political game, but because it's the right thing to do. Someone who's already proven he'll walk through hell for children he doesn't even know. She leaned forward. I'm offering you a job. Become their personal guardian. Help me uncover who within the treaty negotiations wants me dead. In return, I'll provide protection, resources, and I'll ensure your military record is reviewed, the desertion charges reconsidered. Jake stared at her. You're offering me redemption. I'm offering you a chance to save lives instead of mourning the ones you couldn't save. Kyril's voice softened. My daughter's first memory when they woke was your face, Corporal. A scarred human stranger carrying them through a storm. They're already asking for you. They trust you. She stood, regal composure sliding back into place. The treaty protects millions of lives on both sides. If it fails, we return to Cold War, then hot war, then extinction. I need you, Corporal Reeves. More importantly, Vera and Mira need you. She moved toward the door, then paused. You have until you're cleared for release to decide. But know this, whoever tried to kill my daughters will try again, and next time, I may not have a broken soldier with a hero's heart nearby to stop them. The door closed behind her, leaving Jake alone with a choice that felt disturbingly like destiny. Through the wall he heard it, children's laughter, weak but real, alive because of him. For 3 years, Jake Reeves had been running from responsibility, from connection, from the guilt of failure. Maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to find out if a deserter could become a guardian. Maybe it was time to save more than just two lives in a storm. When the doctor returned an hour later, Jake had one question. When can I start? He was discharged from the medbay, not back to his frozen outpost, but into the gleaming heart of the storm he'd just survived. The Glacius 7 Treaty Compound was a city unto itself, a sterile, high-tech world of human and Crystari diplomats, soldiers, and families. And within it, Cairo's diplomatic residence was a fortress of quiet luxury. It was a new reality, a new mission. The deserter was no longer in exile. He had a post, and two very small, very important lives to guard. Jake's new life was a series of silent contrasts. Days were spent in the bright, sterile halls of the diplomatic residence, a hardened soldier shadowing two small, luminescent children, while their mother, Kirill, navigated tense treaty sessions that could decide the fate of galaxies. Jake found himself answering questions about Earth's oceans and the color of its sky. The twins, Vera and Mira, were a force of nature all their own. Traumatized but unbroken, they were insatiably curious. One afternoon, while watching him clean his sidearm, Mira tugged on his sleeve. "Teach us that," she said, her sister nodding in agreement. Human survival skills. Jake's gruff exterior, his carefully maintained wall of indifference began to show cracks. He found himself teaching them how to tie knots, how to read a compass, how to tell which alien fungus was safe to eat. They in turn told him stories of the Crystari homeworld, their innocent chatter a balm on his scarred soul. But when the twins were asleep, his mission shifted. The nights belonged to Kyril and the conspiracy. In her private study, surrounded by holographic star charts, she laid out the grim reality. "The treaty has enemies on all sides," she explained, her regal composure a mask for the mother's fear he now recognized. "The human colonial militia, extremists who see any alliance with non-humans as a betrayal, the Crystari Purist Council, who believe the same of us." She paused, her gaze meeting his. "But the most dangerous is the Vex conglomerate, a weapons syndicate that has made trillions from our Cold War. Peace is bad for business." Jake listened, his mind already working the angles. "The storm," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It wasn't Vex tech. It was military grade. High-level clearance." "Exactly," Kirill confirmed. "The attack came from inside this compound." Together they began a covert investigation, sifting through security logs and personnel files in the dead of night. In these quiet, intense hours, a new dynamic formed. Her cool, diplomatic precision was fascinated by his raw, tactical honesty, and he found himself captivated by the fierce intelligence and unwavering resolve beneath her ambassadorial grace. Over the glow of a datapad, their strategy sessions sparked with an undeniable chemistry. Two worlds colliding not in conflict, but in a shared, dangerous purpose. The ceremony was a masterpiece of political theater. On a grand stage erected in the compound's central plaza, humans and Crystari stood side by side, a picture of unity. As a final touch, Vera and Mira were brought forward, presented as living symbols of a shared future. The crowd applauded, but Jake's eyes weren't on the stage. They were scanning the rooftops, the windows, the high towers that overlooked the plaza. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement, a glint of light where no light should be. His training screamed before his mind could process it. In one explosive motion, he lunged, shouting Kirill's name. He slammed into her, a human battering ram, driving her off the podium and to the frozen ground just as a bolt of searing plasma ripped through the air where she had stood. The podium vaporized in a flash of blue-white energy. Chaos erupted. Alarms blared. Security guards scrambled, firing blindly at the distant tower. Jake ignored it all, his body a shield over Kirill's. He felt a wave of searing heat as a second shot went wide, a line of fire branding his shoulder. He grit his teeth against the pain. In the pandemonium, he saw secondary guards rushing Vera and Mira away, their small, terrified faces disappearing into the crowd. A cold dread coiled in his gut. He didn't trust anyone. By the time he was on his feet, the sniper was gone. The weapon analysis confirmed his fears. Vex conglomerate tech. But that was a dead end. Half the delegates on Glacius 7 carried Vex sidearms. "We're leaving," Jake growled later, pacing Kirill's secure office. "I'm taking you and the girls off-world tonight." No, she said, her voice unshakable. Running is what they want. It shows weakness. It kills the treaty. She stood, her gaze locking with his. We will not be dictated to by terrorists. We will find them. That night, the barrier between them shattered. She found him in her private quarters. A medkit opened beside him as he struggled to dress the angry, blistering burn on his shoulder. Without a word, she took the dermal regenerator from his hand. He flinched as her cool, crystalline fingers brushed against the raw wound, but he didn't pull away. The air crackled with unspoken tension. My partner, she said, her voice a near whisper, her eyes fixed on her work. The twins' father. He died 3 years ago. They called it a shuttle malfunction, an accident. She finally looked up, her regal composure gone, replaced by a raw, haunting grief. I believe it was the first attempt to stop me. Jake stared into her crystal blue eyes, seeing not an ambassador, but a woman who had already lost too much. His mission, once a job, solidified into a crusade. He reached up, his uninjured hand covering hers. No one, he said, his voice a low iron promise. No one will take you or your daughters, not while I draw breath. Jake's paranoia became a silent, obsessive hunt. He became a ghost in the compound's digital nervous system, splicing into secure comms channels and planting microscopic trackers on delegation staff he deemed high risk. He trusted no one. His instincts, honed by years of betrayal, screamed that the enemy wasn't just outside the walls, but walking the halls beside them. He found it late one night, buried under layers of military-grade encryption, a ghost signal piggybacking on a secure diplomatic channel. A conversation between a Vex handler and someone inside the human delegation. Jake worked for hours, his frost-bitten fingers aching as he reverse-engineered the data trail. Finally, a name materialized on his screen, and the air left his lungs in a ragged gasp. Colonel Hendricks, his former commanding officer, the architect of the mission that got his squad killed, the man who branded him a deserter and left him for dead. The motive was a toxic cocktail of greed and ideology. Vex had paid him millions. But Hendricks also genuinely believed peace with the Crystari was a slow poison that would weaken humanity. He was a patriot willing to burn the future for his convictions. Jake brought the evidence to Chiral, the data glowing between them in the silent room. The revelation was a hammer blow. For Chiral, it was a political catastrophe. Hendricks was a respected military liaison. To accuse him without catching him red-handed would shatter the human delegation's trust, trigger an interstellar incident, and kill the treaty instantly. They would call her a paranoid alien warmonger. We can't just expose him, she said, her voice strained, the diplomat in her warring with the mother. We need to catch him in the act, an act so undeniable it purges the poison without killing the patient. She looked at him, her crystal eyes filled with a terrifying resolve. We will set a trap, and we will be the bait. Jake felt a cold fury rise in his throat. The plan was everything he stood against. It meant putting Vera and Mira, the 2 lives he had dragged back from the brink, directly in the line of fire. It meant dangling the family he'd just found in front of the monster who had taken his last one. He wanted to refuse, to grab them and run to the farthest star. But as he looked at Kirill's unyielding face, he saw the brutal logic. It was the only way to save the treaty, to expose the entire conspiracy, and to ensure this threat was ended for good. His duty as a protector and his mission as an operative were at war, and the only path forward was through the fire. He gave a single grim nod. The night before the trap, the compound fell into a deceptive silence. The twins were asleep, safe for now, their breaths soft and even. Jake couldn't rest. He found himself on a high observation balcony, the triple-pane glass the only thing separating him from the endless, frozen wastes where this had all begun. He stared out at the swirling snow. The same white hell he'd carried 2 dying girls through. You look like a man about to walk into a storm. He didn't turn. He recognized the quiet authority in Chiril's voice. She came to stand beside him, her reflection a pale, luminous ghost in the glass. Thank you, Jake, she said, her voice stripped of its diplomatic steel. Not as an ambassador, as a mother. She followed his gaze to the horizon. Their father, he also believed in his ideals, so much so that he took risks. He thought he was fighting for a better future, but he left his daughters without a father. I'm terrified I'm doing the same thing. Jake finally turned to face her. He was fighting a war, Jake said, his voice rough. You're fighting so no other children, human or Crystari, have to grow up in one. There's a difference. Her composure, always so perfect, fractured for a second. In her eyes, he saw not a negotiator, but a woman gambling with the only thing in the universe that mattered to her. She reached out, and her hand, cool and smooth as polished crystal, rested on his. His own hand was a roadmap of scars and frostbite, a brutal contrast to her ethereal grace. The touch was a jolt, a connection that ran deeper than words. I haven't felt safe in 3 years, she confessed in a whisper. Not until you. He looked down at their joined hands, at the light from her skin casting a soft blue glow over his scars. I was already dead, he admitted, the words tasting like rust. Walking around in a graveyard I built for myself. Finding your daughters in that storm, they brought me back. You brought me back. The space between them vanished. She rose on her toes and he met her halfway. The kiss was slow, hesitant at first, then deep and desperate. It was a merging of two worlds, his rugged human warmth against her cool, luminescent skin. He tasted salt and some faint, exotic spice that was uniquely her. It wasn't just passion. It was a desperate, powerful affirmation of life before the coming dawn could bring death. Later, in the silent dark of her chambers, lying beside her, he watched the soft light pulsing from her skin in time with her heartbeat. He traced the line of her shoulder, a silent vow forming in the core of his soul. He would get her and her daughters through this. Or he would die making sure the man who'd taken his first family would never touch his second. The diplomatic retreat was a fortress of glass and steel carved into the side of a glacier, a supposed sanctuary for the final treaty negotiations. Kyril, Vera, and Mira played their parts perfectly, public and vulnerable. But Jake was a ghost, moving through service corridors with a small team of Kyril's most trusted Crystari guards, his own sensors layered over the lodge's official security. The attack came exactly as he'd predicted. First, the main power grid went dead, plunging the lodge into the crimson glow of emergency lighting. Then communications were sliced, isolating them in a bubble of silence. On Jake's private network, red icons swarmed the perimeter. Vex mercenaries breaching the outer walls. Their orders were simple: make the ambassador and her daughters disappear. A tragic system malfunction. No witnesses. But they hadn't accounted for Jake. He'd turned their high-tech prison into his personal hunting ground. As the first kill team breached a service hatch, a shaped charge blew the corridor, burying them under a ton of synthetic ice. Another team, moving through the ventilation system, was met with a targeted flood of cryogenic coolant. The lodge became a frozen battleground. Jake moved through the chaos, a phantom of vengeance, systematically dismantling the assault. He checked the secure channel to the twins' panic room. They were safe, then melted back into the shadows. In the cavernous main hall, Kyril was not a victim. She was a prosecutor. Armed with a Crystari plasma pistol, she activated a hidden broadcaster. Her calm, resolute face flashed onto every screen back at the treaty compound. To the members of the human and Crystari delegations, she began, her voice ringing with cold fury as plasma fire impacted the wall behind her. You are now bearing witness to a direct assault on this treaty. From his remote command post, Colonel Hendricks watched his masterpiece crumble into a live-stream nightmare. The trap wasn't for Kyril. It was for him. He bolted, running for an emergency transport. But a figure blocked his path in the sub-zero gale outside. It was Jake, silhouetted against the swirling snow. The fight was brutal and personal, a maelstrom of fists and fury in the biting wind. It wasn't just a fight, it was an exorcism. Every blow Jake landed was for the squad Hendricks had abandoned. Every block was for the family Hendricks had tried to take from him. The fight ended with Jake's knee on the colonel's chest, the barrel of his pistol pressed against Hendricks' temple in the freezing dark. Jake dragged the half-conscious colonel through the shattered doorway, a trail of blood smearing the pristine white floor. He shoved Hendricks into the center of the hall, directly into the unwavering gaze of Kirill's live broadcast. The camera zoomed in on the traitor's ruined face, a symbol of the corruption festering beneath the treaty. With ice-cold diplomatic precision, Kirill's voice cut through the chaos. "Colonel Hendricks," she commanded, her face a mask of regal fury. "The galaxy is watching. Confess." A hateful, bloody sneer twisted Hendricks' lips. "This treaty is a disease," he spat, his voice raspy. "Peace makes us weak. The Vex conglomerate paid me millions to stop it. And I'd do it again to keep humanity pure." He coughed, a rattling sound in his chest. Then his eyes found Kyrill's. "But don't think you're so clean. You want to know who else is on the Vex payroll? Ask your own people. The Purist Council." Before he could utter another name, a flash of movement came from behind Kyrill. One of her own Crystari guards, a trusted operative, raised a compact plasma pistol, aiming it squarely at Hendrix's head to silence him forever. Jake didn't think. He reacted. With a guttural roar, he lunged, shoving Hendrix to the floor as a bolt of incandescent energy tore through the air. The shot, meant for the traitor, slammed into Jake's side. A supernova of white-hot agony erupted through him, stealing his breath and buckling his knees. He staggered, clutching the searing wound, but his eyes never left the would-be assassin. The remaining Crystari guards tackled the Purist agent, disarming him in seconds. Medical teams swarmed the room. The live feed captured it all: the captured human traitor, the subdued Crystari extremist, and the bleeding human hero who had just saved them both. Across the planet, human and Crystari authorities, galvanized by the undeniable proof, began mobilizing. The conspiracy wasn't just exposed, it was cauterized. Jake's vision blurred, Kyrill's terrified face the last thing he saw. He had kept his promise. The treaty wasn't broken. It was forged anew in the fire of betrayal, stronger than ever. Waking was slow, like surfacing from a deep, frozen ocean. The searing agony in his side was gone, replaced by a strange, regenerative warmth. The air smelled sterile, but beneath it, a faint, sweet scent he now recognized as Crystari. He forced his eyes open. It wasn't the ceiling of a medical bay he saw first, but two small faces, etched with solemn worry. Vera and Mira were perched on stools beside his bed, their tiny crystalline hands resting gently on his bandaged ones. They weren't crying. They were standing watch. They refused to leave their post. Then he saw her. Kyrill sat in a chair beside them, her regal posture softened by exhaustion, but her eyes were clear and bright with relief. She leaned forward, placing her cool palm over his heart. "You're awake," she whispered, the sound a balm on his frayed nerves. "You saved us, Jake. You saved everyone." He tried to speak, but she just shook her head softly. "It's over. Hendrix is in custody, along with the Purist agent. The live broadcast shattered the conspiracy. Vex executives are being indicted across the sector. The treaty, it's going to be signed." He let the victory wash over him, a distant tide. But Kyrill wasn't finished. Her grip on his hand tightened. "There's more," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more personal. "Human military command reviewed your file. With Hendrix' corruption exposed, they re-examined the mission that got your squad killed. The desertion charges have been dropped. Your record is being corrected to reflect the truth." She met his gaze, her crystal blue eyes holding his. "You've been exonerated, Jake. You're free." The word free hung in the air, feeling hollow and wrong. Free to go where? Back to the frozen wastes? Back to being a ghost? He looked at the two little girls holding his hands as if he were their anchor in the universe. He looked at the magnificent woman whose life had become tangled with his. Freedom wasn't out there. It was right here. "I'm not going anywhere," he rasped, the words raw but absolute. A slow, brilliant smile broke across Kyrill's face, the first he'd ever seen that held no weight of office, only pure, unguarded joy. "I know," she promised. "I wouldn't let you leave even if you tried." The signing ceremony was held in the same hall where plasma fire had nearly torn their future apart. But today the air wasn't filled with fear. It was filled with light. Before a combined assembly of human and Crystari delegates, the treaty was ratified. The ice planet was no longer Glacius 7, By joint decree, it was now Hope's Gate. Kirill stood at the grand podium, Vera and Mira at her side, their small hands holding hers. Jake stood just behind them, a silent partner, no longer just a bodyguard. Kirill spoke of how peace wasn't built by politicians, but by individuals choosing courage over fear, connection over division. Then her eyes found his across the stage. This treaty is embodied by the actions of one man, she announced, her voice resonating with quiet power. A human who risked everything for two alien children he didn't know. He is the proof that our two peoples can not only coexist, but protect one another. Jake felt the weight of 1,000 gazes, the glare of the holocams. He wasn't a soldier in the shadows anymore. He was a symbol. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, deflecting the credit back to her, to the family she fought so hard for. Later, the offer was made formal. He was asked to become the first chief of joint security for the Hope's Gate Treaty Zone, to build and lead an integrated human Crystari protection force. It was a culmination of everything he was, a soldier, a protector, a man caught between two worlds. He accepted. Kirill was appointed the first ambassador general, making them the public faces of the new alliance. Their partnership, professional and deeply personal, was now a symbol itself, proof that two people from different worlds, broken in their own ways, could build something stronger than stone, more enduring than ice. 6 months passed. Hope's Gate was no longer an idea. It was a reality. But peace is a garden that must be constantly weeded. Remnants of the Vex conglomerate and the extremist cells they'd funded still festered in the dark corners of the galaxy, whispering promises of revenge. Jake knew this. He felt it every day. It was why, even at a school culture fair, his eyes never stopped scanning. Vera and Mira were on a small stage, proudly presenting their project on the history of Earth's first contact myths. Kirill watched them with a soft, maternal pride. Jake watched the crowd, and then he saw it. A man in a maintenance uniform standing too still. His face was slick with sweat despite the controlled climate. His hand was shoved deep into a pocket, unnaturally rigid. But it was the eyes that triggered the alarm in Jake's soul. They weren't looking at the stage. They were staring through it, fixed on a point in the future just a few seconds away. There was no time for a warning. "Down!" Jake roared, vaulting over a row of chairs. He grabbed Vera and Mira, tucking them under his arms like footballs and diving behind the reinforced podium. Kirill screamed his name, her diplomatic composure shattering. The world dissolved into a flash of white-hot light and a deafening roar that tore the air apart. The shockwave slammed into Jake's back like a battering ram, throwing him against the podium. Shrapnel peppered his body, and a searing pain shot through his leg. The last thing he heard before the ringing in his ears consumed everything was the sound of his own body shielding the girls from the blast. He came to in the medbay, the familiar scent of antiseptic and Crystari biofoam filling his nostrils. The pain was a dull, managed throb. Kirill was at his side, her face a mask of terror and relief. Her cool, crystalline hand was gripping his, so tightly her knuckles were white. "They're safe," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "You saved them. Again." But this time the relief was laced with poison. "This will never end, will it?" she said, her voice hollow. "As long as I'm in this role, they will be targets. I've put a bullseye on my own children." Jake pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing. He looked past her, to the doorway where Vera and Mira stood, watching him with wide, frightened eyes. "Giving up is what they want," he said, his voice raspy. "They win if you hide. If we hide." He looked at Kirill, his gaze intense. "So we don't hide, we prepare." "Prepare?" Jake, he was a suicide bomber. "How do we prepare for that?" "By empowering them," he said, nodding toward the girls. "We can't build a fortress around them their whole lives, so we make at them the fortress. We teach them. Everything I know, everything you know, your mental discipline, my survival skills. We give them the tools to see the threat, to react, to survive." Kirill stared at him, her initial resistance melting away as she saw the fierce logic in his eyes. This was the next step. Not just protecting them, but making them protectors of themselves. The training began a week later. In the quiet of their private gymnasium, Jake taught them how to read a room, how to spot an anomaly, how to break a hold. Kirill guided them through Kristari focusing techniques, teaching them to sharpen their senses and control their fear. It was a strange and perfect synthesis, human tactical awareness blended with alien mental fortitude. They were no longer just a symbol. They were becoming a unit, a family forged in crisis, learning to stand together against the storm. 1 year later, from the observation deck of Hope's Gate Central Command, Jake watched a new city breathe. The endless frozen white he'd once used as a tomb was now threaded with the lights of commerce and life. Small green zones, impossible miracles of terraforming, dotted the landscape. He felt a familiar crystalline warmth press against his back as Kirill wrapped her arms around him. They were partners now in every sense, bonded by laws both human and Kristari. "Trade is up 300%, she murmured, her voice a soft melody against the hum of the station. "Joint colony ventures are ahead of schedule. Violent incidents are down 90%. Before he could answer, a flurry of motion and joyous shouts announced the arrival of his other two reasons for breathing. Vera and Mira, now 8, scrambled to his side, waving holographic acceptance letters. "We got in," Vera beamed. "The first integrated youth academy." "They're training future leaders and protectors," Mira added, her eyes sparkling with the same fierce intelligence as her mother's. She looked up at him, a hopeful grin on her face. "Will you come teach our class survival skills, Jake?" He knelt, his hardened features breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "Someone has to make sure you kids can handle a blizzard." They laughed, a sound that was now the center of his universe. Kirill placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently as he rose. He looked from his daughters to his partner, and then back out at the world they were building. Jake thought he was a dead man walking, punishing himself in exile for the lives he couldn't save. But 2 frozen girls in a storm gave him a second chance. Not just at life, but at family, purpose, and love. He carried them through that blizzard, but in truth they carried him out of his own frozen hell. And now together they protect a future worth believing in.